She sat alone at the wedding, until a single-dad millionaire whispered, "Pretend you're with me." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to today's story. The string quartet played softly in the background as golden lights shimmered across the grand ballroom. Laughter and champagne sparkled in the air. Everyone looked perfect, every smile rehearsed. And yet, at the very edge of the room, a young woman sat alone at a table meant for two. Her name was Ella Martin. Her dress was borrowed, the pale pink fabric slightly faded at the seams. She tried to blend in, keeping her back straight, pretending the empty chair beside her did not feel like a spotlight. It was her ex-boyfriend's wedding, and her friend had convinced her to attend, saying it was time to prove she had moved on. But as Ella looked around the room filled with laughter and silk gowns, she wondered why she had come at all. The waiters passed by carrying trays of champagne. Ella forced a smile and lifted her glass, though her hands trembled slightly. She whispered to herself, "Just 1 hour, then I can leave." The band shifted into a slower song. Couples drifted toward the dance floor, swaying under the chandelier. Ella lowered her eyes, wishing to disappear. That was when a deep voice beside her broke through the noise. "You look like you would rather be anywhere but here." She turned. Standing behind her was a tall man in a dark suit, his tie loosened. His gaze calm, but piercing. He looked familiar, though she could not place where she had seen him. "I guess I stand out," Ella said, trying to laugh it off. "You do," the man replied. He glanced around the ballroom where a few curious guests were already whispering. Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Pretend you are with me." She blinked. "What?" "Just go with it," he said quietly. "If anyone asks, you are my date. It will save us both from too many questions." "Oh?" Before she could answer, his hand brushed hers, steady and confident. He guided her up from the chair with a polite smile. The whispers around them shifted. To everyone else, they suddenly looked like a couple. Ella's pulse raced. She had no idea who this man was or why he had chosen her, but something in his eyes felt safe. Across the room, a woman approached holding a little girl by the hand. The child's dark curls framed a shy face. "Daddy," the girl said, tugging at his sleeve. "Who is she?" He smiled gently. "This is Ella. She is a friend." Ella's breath caught. The word daddy echoed in her mind. She had just agreed, without meaning to pretend to be the companion of a single father she had met seconds ago. And as the little girl smiled up at her, Ella's world quietly began to shift. The next morning, sunlight poured softly through the wide windows of the Hartley residence, a quiet mansion tucked along the hills outside the city. The sound of distant birds replaced the music of the wedding that had changed everything the night before. Ella Martin had not expected to wake up inside a stranger's world, much less the home of the man who had asked her to pretend to be his companion in front of hundreds of people. She stood near the large doorway, still unsure if she should stay or leave. Her borrowed dress hung neatly on a chair, her hair loosely tied back. The faint smell of brewed coffee filled the air. James Hartley entered the room, now without the formal suit, wearing a white shirt with the sleeves rolled. He looked more human than the commanding man at the wedding. His little daughter, Lila, trailed behind him, carrying a stuffed bunny. The moment Ella saw her, the awkward memory of last night returned the moment the child had called him Daddy. And he had introduced Ella as a friend. "Good morning," James said, his tone calm but distant. "I hope you slept well. Lila insisted you stay for breakfast." Ella smiled politely. "That is kind of her, but I really should be heading home." Lila looked up with wide eyes. "You are leaving already? But I drew something for you." The little girl handed her a piece of paper with colorful crayons. It was a drawing of 3 people holding hands under a bright Sunday. Ella's heart softened. "That is beautiful, Lila," she said gently. "Is this your family?" Lila nodded proudly. "That is Daddy, that is me, and that is you." Ella blinked, caught off guard. James cleared his throat. "Lila, Why do not you take your breakfast in the kitchen first?" When the child had left the room, James sighed. "She does that sometimes. She gets attached easily." "It is all right," Ella said quietly. "She seems wonderful." "She is," he replied, "and she has been through enough change already, which is why I need your help." He handed her a folder, simple, no logo, no label. Inside was a brief document, typed neatly with a few signatures waiting. Ella scanned the lines, her pulse rising. "Wait," she said slowly. "This is a contract." "Yes," James said steady. "A short-term arrangement. After what happened last night, the media has already published photos. They believe you are someone important to me. If we deny it, they will keep chasing. If we confirm it, the attention will fade faster." "So you want me to pretend," she said, "to keep the story alive?" "Exactly. Just for a few weeks. I will compensate you fairly. It will help protect Lila from the chaos. She already lost her mother to the press once. I will not let it happen again." Ella looked at him for a long moment. He did not sound like the powerful businessman the newspapers wrote about. He sounded tired, like a man protecting the last piece of peace he had left. She lowered the folder. "I do not like lying." "Neither do I," James said softly. "But sometimes silence is worse. You were kind to Lila. That is rare in my world. I trust you." The words hung in the air. Trust. Coming from a millionaire who barely knew her, it felt heavier than money. After a long pause, Ella nodded. "All right, but I want the truth to stay clean. I will not play the girlfriend role for tabloids or show affection just for cameras." James's eyes softened. "Understood. It will remain professional." He reached out a hand. Ella hesitated, then shook it. The handshake was firm, not romantic. An agreement between two people trying to survive public pressure. That afternoon, Ella followed the chauffeur to a boutique to prepare for a charity gala scheduled that weekend. Everything felt surreal. Elegant gowns, pearls, and mirrors surrounded her like another universe. The stylist whispered that she looked like she belonged, but Ella only smiled faintly. She did not belong anywhere near this world. Back at the mansion, Lila ran to greet her, twirling in the hallway. "Daddy says we are going to a big party. Are you coming too?" "Yes," Ella said gently. "I guess I am." "Then you need sparkles," the little girl said, placing a tiny sticker shaped like a star on Ella's wrist. "For luck." Ella laughed for the first time that day. It was small, but real. That night, she stood before the mirror in her guest room, wearing one of the dresses provided for her. She looked almost unrecognizable, the reflection of a woman who could easily pass for someone from James Hartley's world. Still, inside, she was the same Ella who had borrowed a faded dress to attend a wedding she should never have gone to. A soft knock sounded on the door. James appeared in the reflection behind her. "You look ready," he said, choosing his words carefully. She turned, smiling politely. "Just for tonight. After all, it is only pretend." He nodded slowly. "Of course, only pretend." But as their eyes met, there was a silence neither of them knew how to explain. It was not attraction, not yet, but something quieter, something like recognition. Outside, rain began to fall against the windows, steady and rhythmic. Lila's laughter echoed faintly from another room. Ella exhaled, steadying herself. The contract lay folded on her nightstand, a signature waiting for morning. She knew once she signed it, there would be no turning back. For now, she watched the rain slide down the glass and whispered to herself, "What did I just agree to?" Somewhere down the hall, James stood in his study, staring at a framed photograph of his late wife. He whispered the same question under his breath. Neither of them knew that this pretend arrangement born from one impulsive whisper at a wedding was about to change everything. The next morning began with the quiet hum of rain on the wide glass windows of the Hartley mansion. The world outside was soft and gray, like a paused painting. Inside, the scent of toast and brewed coffee filled the air. Ella sat at the breakfast table across from James Hartley and his daughter, Lila. The formality of the marble dining hall made her feel small. The table stretched long enough to seat 20 guests, yet only the three of them were there. The silence between the clinking of cutlery felt almost too heavy. Lila was the first to break it. Daddy, can Miss Ella come to the park with us after breakfast? James looked up from his coffee cup. We will see, Lila. Miss Ella has things to do. I do not mind, Ella said with a soft smile. It would be nice to get some fresh air. Lila's eyes lit up. See, Daddy? She wants to. Oh, James sighed, but there was a small smile hidden in the corner of his expression. All right, just for an hour, but no ice cream before lunch. The small exchange brought a flicker of warmth to the cold morning. For the first time, Ella felt that this arrangement might not be all business after all. Later that day, they walked through Central Park under umbrellas. The wet leaves glistened, and the laughter of children echoed nearby. Ella held Lila's hand while James walked beside them, phone in hand but rarely looking at it. You work too much, Ella said quietly, glancing at him. James looked surprised. You barely know me. Maybe, she replied, but I can tell when someone carries too much weight in their eyes. He smiled faintly, but said nothing. They stopped near a bench where Lila began feeding ducks with crumbs from her pocket. Ella sat beside James, her dress slightly damp from the rain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The park was peaceful, filled only with the gentle patter of water on leaves. She reminds me of her mother, James said finally. Lila has her eyes. Ella turned to him, her tone gentle. I did not mean to ask before, but what happened? He exhaled slowly. Car accident. 2 years ago. The media would not leave us alone even after the funeral. I promised Lila I would keep her safe from that world. That is why I keep my distance from people. Oh, Ella nodded quietly. That must be hard. Harder than I ever say out loud, he replied. She looked toward Lila, who was now crouching near the pond, giggling as ducks nibbled the crumbs. She seems happy. You are doing something right. He followed her gaze. Maybe because she forgets faster than I do. The words lingered. There was grief in his tone, but also admiration for the little girl's resilience. When they returned home, the housekeeper handed James a small envelope. Sir, the Foundation's gala confirmed your attendance for tomorrow night. They expect you to bring Miss Martin. Ella blinked. Tomorrow? That soon? It is only a dinner, James said. Public appearances help the story stay consistent. It will be brief. That night, Ella stood in her room reading the same line of the contract for the 10th time. Maintain the appearance of companionship for the duration of 6 weeks. It was written so simply, yet it already felt more complicated than words could capture. The next evening, the city skyline shimmered under the glow of downtown lights. At the entrance of the hotel ballroom, photographers waited behind velvet ropes. James and Ella stepped from the car into a storm of camera flashes. She held her composure. Just as he had instructed, smile politely, walk with confidence, say nothing unnecessary. Inside, the event glittered with crystal chandeliers and soft jazz. Ella could feel eyes following them. James introduced her to a few board members and donors. Everyone seemed polite, but the curiosity was sharp beneath the surface. During the dinner, a woman in a red gown approached the table. Her tone was coated with sugar and venom. James, darling, you did not tell us you were bringing someone new. I thought you were still recovering. Ella smiled, though her heart pounded. We all recover at our own pace, do we not? The woman tilted her head. Oh, how refreshing. And what do you do, miss? Martin, was it? I work in design, Ella replied calmly. Mostly freelance. Not nearly as glamorous as tonight. There was a brief silence, and then the woman smiled stiffly before excusing herself. When she was gone, James leaned slightly toward Ella. That was impressive. I have met people like her before, Ella said softly. Different dress? Same attitude? Hell, he chuckled under his breath. You handled it better than I would have. The rest of the evening passed smoothly, their partnership practiced but natural. The cameras captured every glance, every polite smile. Yet, beneath the act, something else was forming an unspoken rhythm between two people pretending not to care. As they left the gala, the city lights reflected on the car window. Ella looked out, her reflection merging with the skyline. You are good at this, she said quietly. Pretending. So are you, James answered. Their eyes met briefly in the glass. Neither smiled this time. It was not dislike, nor attraction. It was recognition again, two people trapped between truth and performance. Back at the mansion, Lila was already asleep. Ella passed by her room and paused. The little girl was curled up with her stuffed bunny, peaceful and unaware of the world's noise. Ella whispered, "Good night, sweetheart," before turning off the light. Down the hall, James stood in his study, loosening his tie. The rain had stopped outside, but the air still smelled like memory. He looked at the contract folder on his desk and murmured, 6 weeks. Across the corridor, Ella lay awake in her room, staring at the same document. She whispered the same words. Neither of them knew that before those 6 weeks were over, lines between pretending and feeling would begin to blur in ways neither could control. Morning light spilled gently through the tall windows of the Hartley mansion. The rain had cleared, leaving the air crisp and full of promise. The city outside was waking up, unaware of the quiet tension inside the house, where two people were learning how to share space without crossing lines. Ella Martin stood by the kitchen counter, her hair tied in a simple knot, pouring milk into Lila's cereal bowl. The little girl hummed softly, tapping her spoon against the table. James Hartley walked in dressed in his usual dark suit, phone in hand, his expression focused yet distant. "Good morning," Ella said, handing him a cup of black coffee. He glanced up, slightly surprised. "Thank you. You did not have to do that." "I was already here," she replied. It felt polite. He nodded. "Well, it is appreciated." The air between them was polite, professional, but something about the simple domestic scene unsettled him. It had been a long time since there had been someone else in the kitchen, someone humming softly while his daughter laughed. For years, the house had echoed with silence and structure. Now it carried the faint sound of warmth. After breakfast, James left for the office, and Ella spent the day with Lila. They baked cookies that were slightly burned on the edges, and the smell of sugar and laughter filled the air. When James returned that evening, he stopped at the doorway, watching them. Lila was covered in flour, and Ella was laughing, her cheeks flushed. James had not realized how much he had missed the sound of laughter in his own home. Later that evening, after Lila went to bed, Ella stepped out into the garden to get some fresh air. The night sky stretched wide above her, stars faint through the city's light. She wrapped her shawl tighter, enjoying the quiet. "You did well today," came James's voice from behind her. She turned, startled. "You scared me." Sorry," he said, stepping beside her. "Lila could not stop talking about you. She said you bake better cookies than her father." "That is not a high bar," Ella teased, smiling. James chuckled, a rare, genuine sound. "True, I burn toast half the time." They stood there for a moment, both looking out at the trimmed hedges and soft glow of the garden lights. "She is a good kid," Ella said softly. "She must get that from her mother." "Oh." James's face shifted slightly, the faintest shadow crossing it. "She does. Her mother was. Everything gentle that I am not." Ella looked down. "I did not mean to bring that up." "It is fine," he said quietly. "It has been 2 years, but sometimes it feels like yesterday. Lila does not remember much, but I do. Every detail." There was a silence filled with honesty, not sadness. The kind that builds trust. "I think she just wants to see you happy," Ella said. "Children feel that." He turned to her, meeting her eyes. "And you? Do you ever get to be happy?" Ella hesitated. "I think happiness is a luxury. Right now, I just try to be kind." James looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Kindness lasts longer than happiness. A soft breeze moved through the garden. Somewhere inside, the old grandfather clock struck 10. They both stood in the quiet, neither moving, both understanding something had shifted small, but real. The next morning brought new tension. The front page of a business magazine featured a photograph from the gala. James and Ella side by side, her hand resting gently on his arm as they smiled at the camera. The headline read, "Hartley's New Flame, Mystery Woman Behind the Millionaire." James dropped the magazine onto the counter. "So it begins." Ella frowned. "They twisted everything." "They always do," he said. "Ignore it. It will fade." But the calls started coming, reporters, sponsors, investors, wanting clarification. Even at Lila's school, whispers began among the parents. That afternoon, Ella overheard 2 house staff members whispering near the pantry. "Do you think she is really with him?" one asked. Please. He would never fall for someone like her, the other replied. It is clearly for show. Their voices fell silent when Ella entered, but the damage had been done. She excused herself, walking quickly outside, her heart heavy. Later that night, she confronted James in the study. You said this would fade quietly. It is not. People are talking about me, about your daughter. He rubbed his temples. I will handle it. I promise. I did not sign up to become a headline, she said. This was supposed to be private. I know, he said firmly, but you need to trust me on this. She exhaled, frustrated. That word again, trust. You say it easily, but you do not share anything real. He looked up at her, eyes tired. Do you think I do not want to? The last time I trusted someone with my family, I lost them both to the chaos that followed. The room went still. Ella's anger softened into understanding. I am sorry, she said. I do not want Lila dragged into something cruel. Neither do I, James said quietly. That is why I asked you to stay. Because you are the first person who has not tried to use her name. They stood in silence, the air heavy but sincere. Finally, Ella said, then keep your promise. Protect her. And if you cannot protect me, I will protect myself. James nodded once. Fair enough. When she left the room, he stared at the contract folder on his desk, the one that started everything. The paper was supposed to be a shield, but it was beginning to feel like a trap for both of them. In the hallway, Ella paused by Lila's door. The little girl was asleep, clutching her stuffed bunny. Ella whispered, You deserve peace, little one. Ah. Then she walked to her room, unsure whether she could still believe in the line between pretending and feeling. Outside, the city glittered in silence. Inside the mansion, two hearts began to learn that even a contract could not protect them from what was slowly, inevitably, becoming real. The following week arrived with a chill that swept through the city. Autumn leaves gathered on the long driveway of the Hartley mansion, turning gold and brown under the fading light. Inside, the house was quiet. The stillness felt different now, heavier than before. The magazine headlines had not stopped, and whispers still lingered wherever Ella Martin went. That morning, Ella helped Lila prepare for school. The little girl sat on the kitchen counter, swinging her legs, her backpack beside her. Miss Ella, can I give you something? Lila asked, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. What is it? Ella asked gently. It is a thank you card, Lila said proudly, because you helped me with my reading homework. Ella unfolded the paper. It was a crayon drawing of three figures, James, Lila, and Ella standing beneath a big heart. Written in uneven letters were the words, Thank you for staying with us. Ella's eyes softened. This is beautiful, sweetheart. I will keep it forever. James entered the kitchen at that moment, adjusting his cufflinks. His voice was calm, but distant. The driver is waiting, Lila. You will be late. Lila nodded, jumping down from the counter and hugging Ella before running off. The door closed behind them, leaving only the sound of silence. Ella turned to the sink, washing the cup she had been holding. James lingered at the doorway, watching her for a moment. You do not have to do all of that, he said. The staff can handle it. I know, Ella replied without looking up. But it gives me something to do besides reading lies about myself online. He hesitated. You should ignore them. That is easy to say when the world believes every word about you, she said, turning toward him. But I am the unknown woman in your story, remember? People get to fill in the blanks however they want. James's expression softened. Then let me fill in one of them. You are not alone in this. Ella sighed, setting down the cup. Sometimes it feels that way. That evening, the mansion hosted a private charity dinner for Hartley Foundation partners. It was not a public event, but a small group of investors, donors, and family members. For Ella, it was another test of composure. The dining room glowed with candlelight. Ella wore a simple navy gown, elegant but modest. James escorted her to the table, the image of calm professionalism. Lila had been sent to stay with her nanny for the evening. The conversation around the table was filled with polite laughter and the clinking of glasses. Across from Ella sat a man named Victor Hale, the company's chief financial officer and James's cousin. His smile was charming, but his eyes were sharp. So, Miss Martin, Victor said, leaning slightly forward. I heard you and James met at quite the romantic setting. A wedding, was it not? Ella kept her tone even. Yes, pure coincidence. Victor's grin widened. And yet here you are, living in his home. That is quite the coincidence. The table grew quiet. James set down his fork, his expression unreadable. Victor, enough. Oh, come now, Victor continued. We are family. We can speak freely. Everyone is curious how long this arrangement will last. Ella felt her heart pound, but she refused to look away. I understand curiosity, she said calmly. But I have learned that the people who ask the most questions are usually the ones afraid of the answers. The remark landed like a soft thunderclap. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone cleared their throat, and the conversation shifted away. Later that night, as the last guest left, Ella found James in the study standing near the fireplace. The flames reflected in his eyes. I am sorry for what Victor said, he said quietly. He has never known when to stop. You do not need to apologize for other people, Ella said. But maybe you should start standing up for yourself. He looked at her, surprised. You think I do not? I think you have spent so long controlling every narrative that you forgot how to fight for the truth, she replied softly. You let people talk because it is easier than letting them see who you really are. James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Maybe you are right. There was a long pause, then Ella asked, Why does Victor hate me so much? James hesitated. Because he wanted this company long before I inherited it, and because you make me seem human. Oh, Ella blinked. Human? He nodded slowly. People like Victor think emotions are weaknesses. When you walked into my life, you reminded them that I still have them. The fire crackled between them. The air felt heavier, warmer. I did not mean to cause trouble, Ella said quietly. You did not, James replied. You reminded me of something I thought I had buried. For the first time, his voice carried no distance, no barrier. A soft knock broke the moment. The housekeeper entered to collect the empty glasses and paused, clearly noticing the tension between them. Good night, Mr. Hartley, Miss Martin. When she left, Ella stepped back slightly. It is late. I should rest. James nodded. Good night, Ella. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. For what it is worth, he said. I am glad you are here. She smiled faintly without looking back. So am I. That night, as she lay in bed, the rain began again outside. The sound was steady and calm. Ella held Lila's drawing in her hand, tracing the crayon lines with her fingers. The heart above their heads seemed brighter in the dim light. Across the hall, James sat at his desk, the contract folder open in front of him. He read the final line again. This agreement shall remain in effect for 6 weeks, unless terminated by mutual consent. 6 weeks. He closed the folder slowly. Somewhere between the rules and the routines, the line between agreement and emotion was beginning to vanish. Neither of them knew that the next days would test that line harder than either heart could endure. The following days passed in a quiet rhythm that felt almost natural. The storm of gossip had not completely faded, but inside the Hartley mansion, peace had begun to return. For the first time since the contract was signed, life seemed to settle into a strange but steady routine. Each morning began with laughter from the kitchen. Ella Martin prepared breakfast with Lila, teaching her how to crack eggs and stir pancake batter. The little girl giggled each time she spilled flour across the counter. The sound carried through the halls, reaching James Hartley as he stood by the doorway, pretending to read his messages but really watching the two of them. He had never expected to see his home this alive again. For years it had been orderly but hollow, silent except for footsteps on marble floors. Now, warmth had replaced emptiness. One afternoon, James came home earlier than usual. He found Ella and Lila sitting in the living room, surrounded by sketchbooks and colored pencils. They were drawing on the coffee table, heads bent close together. "Daddy, look," Lila called, holding up her page. "Miss Ella drew me and you at the park." James smiled. "That is very good," he said, looking at the sketch. The lines were soft, capturing something real, his daughter's bright eyes, her laughter, the light touch of his hand guiding hers. "It is just a quick sketch," Ella said, embarrassed. She wanted to learn shading. "It is more than that," James replied quietly. "It feels like a memory." Lila clapped her hands. We should hang it in the hallway. Ella laughed. Maybe we will. As the evening grew, Lila grew sleepy, her head resting on Ella's shoulder. James watched silently as Ella carried the girl upstairs and tucked her into bed. The tenderness in her movements reminded him of his late wife. Yet it was different, gentler, unforced. Later, Ella stepped into the hallway, meeting his gaze. "She is asleep," she whispered. "Thank you," he said softly. "You have done more for her than you realize." Ella smiled faintly. "She makes it easy to care." He nodded, though something in his chest tightened. "You make it easy, too." The silence that followed was warm but uncertain. Both understood there were lines that could not be crossed, at least not yet. The next morning, news broke again, an article online, claiming Ella was secretly using her connection with James to gain business clients. The headline read, "From Waitress to Millionaire's Muse." Ella saw it over breakfast and froze. Lila was at the table coloring, unaware of the tension that filled the air. James entered the room just as she put her phone down. "You saw it," he said. She nodded. "Do you believe it?" "Of course not," he replied immediately. "But others will. That is what they do. They invent stories to make sense of what they do not understand." Ella looked at him, her voice quiet but steady. "You told me this would protect your family. Instead, it is destroying my name." "I will handle it," he said. "When?" she asked. "After the next article? After I am humiliated in public?" James's tone hardened slightly. "You are under my protection. Let me deal with it." "Protection?" she repeated. "That word sounds a lot like control." The room fell silent. Even Lila looked up, sensing the tension. Ella forced a calm smile for the child's sake, and excused herself. Hours later, she found herself walking alone through the garden, the autumn wind cool against her face. She needed space to think. She had agreed to this arrangement to help James and Lila, not to become a target. When she returned inside, she found James in his office. His jacket was off. His tie loosened. Papers scattered across the desk. He looked up when she entered. "I should not have spoken to you like that," he said quietly. "You were right." Ella folded her arms, her voice calm but firm. "You are trying to protect your image, and I am trying to protect my dignity. We are not enemies, James. But this cannot keep happening." He nodded. "I will issue a statement tomorrow morning, publicly. I will make it clear that none of the rumors are true." "That will only make them hungrier," she said softly. "People always want a bigger story." "Then I will give them one," James said. She frowned. "What do you mean?" He met her eyes. "If the world insists on believing we are together, then let them. It will make them stop digging for what is not there. It will protect Lila and shut down the gossip." Ella stared at him, stunned. "You mean extend the act?" "Just for a while longer," he said. "Until the attention fades, you will not have to play a part forever." She shook her head. "You think you can solve everything with control, but real life does not work that way. People have feelings. Even you." He said nothing, his jaw tightening slightly. Before leaving the room, she turned to him and said quietly, "You are not the only one who lost something to the world, James. But if we keep pretending, we might lose what is still real." That night, Ella sat in her room staring at the sketch Lila had taped to her door. The crayon heart above their heads felt heavier than before. Across the hall, James sat awake, staring at the statement drafted on his computer screen. Every word sounded right, yet none of it felt honest. He minimized the file and turned off the light. The house fell silent again, except for the faint sound of the wind against the windows. Both of them lay awake in their separate rooms, realizing that what began as a contract of convenience had already crossed into something neither could easily name or undo. Morning light drifted gently through the tall curtains, brushing over the walls of the Hartley mansion like soft gold. The house was quiet, almost peaceful. Yet beneath that calm there lingered the weight of yesterday's conversation. Ella Martin had barely slept. Her mind replayed James's words over and over. "If the world insists on believing we are together, then let them." She understood his logic, but logic did not always align with dignity. Pretending had become heavier than she ever imagined. Downstairs, she found James already seated at the long breakfast table, reading the newspaper. His posture was sharp. his coffee untouched. Lila sat beside him, swinging her legs and humming softly while drawing on a napkin. "Good morning," Ella said, forcing a calm tone. Lila smiled brightly. "Good morning, Miss Ella. I drew you again." Ella knelt beside her. The napkin showed a sketch of 3 stick figures, Lila in the middle, James on the left, Ella on the right, all holding hands under a blue sky. "That is beautiful, sweetheart," she said softly. "You are quite the artist." James folded the newspaper, setting it aside. "I released a statement this morning," he said simply. Edge's eyes lifted. "You what?" "I confirmed that you and I are seeing each other," he said quietly. "It was the only way to redirect attention. It will end the rumors." Her heart tightened. "James, that was not your decision to make alone. It protects you," he insisted. "People cannot harm what they believe to be untouchable." "Protects me?" she repeated, her voice calm but steady. "Or protects your company?" For a brief moment, silence filled the room. Even Lila looked up, sensing the tension. Ella straightened. "Excuse me, I need some air." She stepped outside into the garden, the cool morning breeze cutting through the fog in her thoughts. The scent of wet roses lingered in the air. She walked toward the edge of the property, where the stone fountain trickled softly. For the first time, she questioned whether staying had been a mistake. Behind her, the door opened. James followed, his steps measured. "You are angry," he said. "No," she replied without turning. "Anger fades. Disappointment stays longer." He stopped beside her. "I made the best decision I could with the information I had." "You made the decision that gave you control," she said. "That is not the same thing." James exhaled. "You are right. But control is all I have ever known. Without it, everything falls apart." Ella turned to face him. "Then maybe that is the problem. You are too afraid to let life happen, to let people choose you, not out of obligation, but out of heart." "Okay." He looked at her, eyes steady, voice lower. "And you? What are you afraid of, Ella?" She hesitated. "Of being temporary, of being someone's convenient solution instead of someone's truth." For a moment, the air between them felt heavy, fragile, and painfully honest. Before either could say more, the sound of a car engine drew their attention. A sleek black sedan pulled up the driveway. From it stepped Victor Hale, James's cousin and the company's chief financial officer. His smile carried the kind of charm that always hid something sharp. "Good morning, cousin," Victor said smoothly, striding forward. "I hope I am not interrupting." James's jaw tightened. "What do you want, Victor?" Victor glanced between them. "I came to discuss last night's announcement. It is all over the financial news. Investors are talking, and the board is asking questions." James's expression hardened. "It is a personal matter. It should not concern them." "Oh?" "Oh, but it does," Victor said with a grin. "When a company's image depends on its leader's choices, everything is public, especially when that leader starts parading his new companion around like a trophy." Ella felt her stomach twist. "That is enough," she said firmly. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Touchy, are we? I was only stating facts." James stepped forward, his tone cold. "Leave." Victor chuckled. "Of course. But be careful, cousin. The board's patience is not infinite. They are watching how you handle your distractions." He turned, walking back to his car. The sound of tires on gravel echoed through the quiet drive until it disappeared completely. Ella crossed her arms. "He is enjoying this." "He always does," James said, his voice tight. "He wants the company. He will use any crack he can find." She looked at him. "Then maybe stop giving him cracks to use." James's expression softened slightly. "You do not pull your punches, do you?" "I do not see the point," she replied. "People lie enough already." That night, the mansion felt unusually still. After dinner, Lila went to bed early, tired from school. Ella sat by the window in her room, staring out at the lights of the city. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she said. James entered, holding 2 mugs of tea. "I thought you could use this," he said quietly. She accepted the cup, the steam rising between them. "Thank you." "Oh." He hesitated near the door, as though searching for words. "I know you think I crossed a line. You are right. But I meant it when I said it was to protect you." Ella looked at him. Maybe protection and partnership are not the same thing. He nodded slowly. Then tell me how to fix it. Start by letting me choose my place in your story, she said, not letting others define it for me. For the first time, he smiled small, genuine, uncertain. I can do that. Oh. When he left, Ella set the tea on the windowsill. The night outside was calm, the stars faint but steady. She thought about Lila's napkin drawing 3 figures under a sky, too blue to be real. She whispered softly, maybe one day we will earn that sky. Across the hall, James stood in the dark of his study, staring at the photograph of his late wife. For the first time, he spoke aloud what he had never dared to say. I am learning to breathe again. The words hung in the still air, fragile but true, a confession, meant for no one but himself. Neither of them knew that tomorrow would test that fragile peace in ways they could not yet imagine. The next morning arrived with a soft mist hanging over the city, wrapping the Hartley mansion in quiet gray light. Inside, the smell of coffee and toasted bread filled the air, a peaceful start to what seemed like an ordinary day. Yet beneath the calm, something had begun to shift, not in the house, but in the world outside its gates. Ella Martin stood by the kitchen window, watching the gardener trim the hedges. She had slept little. Her mind was full of questions that had no answers about the contract, the rumors, and the way James Hartley had started to look at her not as a hired presence, but as something more human, more real. Lila ran into the room, her shoes untied, holding a drawing in her hands. Miss Ella, look what I made. Ella turned, smiling. What is it this time? It is a family, Lila said proudly, showing a crayon picture of 3 stick figures inside a house. That is Daddy, that is me, and that is you. I drew our home too. The drawing was bright and full of color, pink walls, yellow windows, and a heart floating above the roof. Ella knelt beside her, touched by the innocence in the child's world. It is perfect, Lila. Oh. James entered the room just then, carrying a folder and adjusting his tie. He looked tired but composed. Good morning, he said. Morning, Daddy, Lila chirped, running to hug him. Miss Ella says my drawing is perfect. It is beautiful, James said, smiling briefly before looking at Ella. We need to talk. Lila looked between them. Are you going to talk about boring adult things? James laughed softly. Maybe just a little. Go finish your cereal, sweetheart. Oh. When the child had left the room, Ella stood quietly. What happened? James opened the folder and placed it on the counter. Inside were several printed pages, screenshots from financial reports and social media threads. Someone leaked internal company data. The board is furious. And somehow, they are linking it to you. Ella froze. Me? That is ridiculous. I know, he said. But the leak came from an account using your old email address, the one you gave when we first met. I closed that account months ago, she said. I can prove it. I believe you, James said firmly. But the board will not. They think I am compromised. Her voice lowered. Because of me? Yes. The words hung between them, heavy as stone. Later that afternoon, the house was tense. Reporters had already begun circling online with speculation. The security guard at the gate had to turn away photographers. Ella stayed in her room, pacing, the accusation echoing in her mind. She had worked her entire life to protect her integrity. Now, in a matter of hours, strangers were tearing it apart. When James came to see her, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at her folded hands. I told the board I would investigate personally, he said. But they want distance between us until this clears. Distance, she repeated. So that is what I am now, a liability. That is not what I said. It is what they think, she replied. And maybe what you are starting to think too. James took a step closer. Do not twist this, Ella. I am trying to protect you. By separating from me? She asked quietly. That sounds less like protection and more like retreat. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. You do not understand how ruthless the board can be. If I lose their trust, everything my father built falls apart. She rose slowly, meeting his eyes. Maybe the problem is that you keep trying to protect legacies instead of people. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was thick, full of everything they wanted to say but could not. That evening, after dinner, Ella helped Lila with her bedtime story. The child leaned against her, warm and safe, unaware of the storm brewing around the adults who loved her. "Miss Ella," Lila said sleepily, "are you going to stay forever?" Ella hesitated, brushing the girl's hair gently. "I do not know, sweetheart, but I promise I will stay as long as I can." "Good," Lila murmured, "because Daddy smiles more when you are here." The words pierced deeper than Ella expected. She kissed Lila's forehead softly, whispering, "Sleep well, little one." Downstairs, James stood alone in his study, staring at the contract folder. The paper that had once seemed like structure now felt like a chain. He reached into the drawer and took out a photograph of his late wife, her smile calm, her eyes bright. "What would you tell me to do?" he whispered. The following morning, chaos arrived with the mail. A thin envelope was delivered to the mansion with no return address. Inside was a printed email exchange, carefully edited to look like correspondence between Ella and a journalist, fabricated lines that suggested she had leaked private information for money. James read it in silence, his jaw tightening. "This is fake," he said under his breath. But before he could confront anyone, Victor Hale appeared at his office door that afternoon, holding the same documents. "You have a problem, cousin," Victor said coolly. "The board has already seen this. They will demand her removal from your life immediately." James's eyes flashed. "You planted this, did you not?" Victor smiled faintly. "I am not saying I did. I am not saying I did not. But it solves your problem, does it not? You end the farce, she disappears, and the company stabilizes." "Get out," James said through gritted teeth. Victor smirked and left, his footsteps echoing down the hall. That night, James found Ella in the living room, folding one of Lila's blankets. Her eyes lifted when she saw him. "I think I should leave for a while," she said before he could speak. "Until this clears." "No," he said quickly. "That is exactly what they want." "Oh, crew, it is what might save you," she replied gently. "And maybe that is what you need right now." He took a slow breath. "Ella," she shook her head, forcing a small smile. "You once said I make things easy. Maybe it is time I make leaving easy too." She walked past him quietly, the sound of her steps fading down the hall. When the door finally closed behind her, James stood in the silence she left behind, realizing that protecting her had turned into losing her, and that somewhere along the way, pretending had become something dangerously, painfully real. Rain fell in thin silver lines against the tall glass windows of the Hartley mansion. The house felt different without Ella Martin's quiet laughter echoing through its halls. Days had passed since she had left, and though everything appeared the same, the polished floors, the scent of morning coffee, the faint hum of distant city life, something vital was missing. James Hartley sat at his desk, the soft glow of his desk lamp spilling across stacks of reports. He was trying to read, but the words blurred. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward the empty chair across from him, the one Ella had used whenever she joined him for late-night discussions about the foundation. A knock sounded at the door. Lila entered, wearing her pajamas and holding her stuffed bunny. "Daddy, when is Miss Ella coming back?" James's heart tightened. "I do not know, sweetheart." "Did she go because of me?" Lila asked quietly. He rose from his chair and knelt beside her. "No, never because of you. She left because grown-ups made things complicated." Lila's lip trembled, but she promised she would stay as long as she could. He pulled her into his arms. "She kept that promise, darling. Sometimes staying means knowing when to go." After putting Lila back to bed, James returned to his study. He opened the folder on his desk, Ella's contract, now unsigned at the last page, where it had always been meant to end. He closed it again, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He no longer cared about the board, the company, or the gossip. He only cared about what he had lost. Meanwhile, across the city, Ella sat in a small rented apartment. The walls were plain, the light dim, but it was peaceful. She had taken up freelance design work again, pouring her energy into sketches that filled the table. Yet every time she looked at a blank page, she saw Lila's crayon drawings in her mind, those hearts and stick figures under the bright blue sky. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text read, "You should see this." A link followed. Cautiously, she opened it. It was an online article titled, "Inside the Scandal." Who framed Ella Martin? The article included evidence clearing her name metadata from the fabricated emails, proving they had been created by an internal source at Hartley Industries. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled. At the bottom, one sentence stood out in bold. Insiders suggest the leak originated from Victor Hale's office. She closed the phone slowly, her mind racing. She knew this was not over. Back at the mansion, James confronted Victor in the boardroom the next morning. The other executives sat in silence as James laid the printed article on the table. "Do you care to explain this?" James asked, his tone steady but sharp. Victor's smirk faltered for the first time. "You think an online post clears her? You are desperate, cousin." "Desperate for truth, yes," James said. "And I have proof that the leak came from your assistant's account. You wanted control, Victor. You used lies to get it. But it ends today." He placed another document on the table, resignation papers, already signed by several board members. "The board knows everything now." Victor's face turned pale. "You cannot do this." "I just did," James replied. "Get out." Victor stood slowly, his voice low with venom. "You think this makes you a hero? You will still lose her." James's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but at least she will know she was never the problem." Later that afternoon, after the confrontation, James drove through the city without a destination. The rain had eased into a drizzle. Traffic lights reflected off the wet streets like fragments of broken glass. He found himself outside the small design studio where Ella sometimes worked. Through the window, he saw her standing near a desk, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, focused on a sketch. The sight of her stopped him completely. He stepped out of the car and entered quietly. The bell above the door chimed. Ella looked up, startled. "James," she said softly. "I know I should have called first," he said. "But I needed to see you." She set down her pencil, wary but calm. "What do you need to say?" He took a slow breath. "You were right about everything. About control, about fear. I thought I could protect everyone by holding the world at a distance. But I only built walls that kept people out, including you." She said nothing, only watched him. "I cleared your name," he continued. "Victor was behind the leak. He is gone from the company. The board knows the truth now." Ella's eyes widened slightly. "You fought for me?" "I fought because I should have done it from the beginning," he said. "You did not deserve any of this." "Oh." The silence stretched between them, fragile and full of things left unsaid. Finally, Ella spoke. "I did not want you to fight for me, James. I just wanted you to believe in me." He nodded slowly. "I do. I always did. I was just too afraid to say it." Outside, the clouds began to part, allowing a thin ribbon of sunlight through. It glowed across the window pane, lighting the sketches spread across the table. Ella looked down, tracing the edge of one of her drawings with her fingers. "You think everything can go back to the way it was?" "No," he said quietly. "I do not want it to. I want it to move forward truthfully this time." She met his gaze, eyes steady but soft. "You once asked what I was afraid of. I think I am still afraid of being temporary." "Then stay," he said gently, "not because of a contract, because it feels right." Ella hesitated. "And what about the world outside those gates?" He smiled faintly. "Let them talk. For once, I do not care." "One?" The moment lingered, neither spoke. Then, from her desk, Ella picked up Lila's old crayon, drawing the one she had kept folded in her sketchbook all this time. She handed it to him. "You tell Lila I still keep this," she said softly. He looked at the drawing, then at her. "Tell her yourself," he replied. "She misses you." For the first time in weeks, Ella smiled, a quiet, fragile smile that carried both exhaustion and hope. As James left the studio, the rain stopped completely. He looked back once to see her standing by the window, watching him go. For both of them, it was not an ending, but the pause before something honest began. The next morning began with the kind of sunlight that felt almost forgiving. The city had shaken off the rain, and the air outside the Hartley mansion was clear and bright. Inside, Lila's laughter carried down the hallway as she played with her stuffed bunny, her joy returning as if nothing bad had ever touched their lives. James Hartley watched from the doorway, the weight that had pressed on his shoulders for weeks now slightly lifted. Victor was gone, the company was steady again, and Ella's name had been cleared. Yet even as the house filled with warmth once more, one thing remained missing her. After breakfast, he called the driver and said, "Prepare the car. I need to go into the city." Lila looked up from her cereal. "Are you going to see Miss Ella?" James hesitated for a second, then smiled. "Would you like to come with me?" Her eyes brightened immediately. "Yes, please." 2 hours later, the black sedan stopped outside a small design studio on a quiet street lined with autumn trees. The windows reflected sunlight like glass mirrors. Ella was inside, sorting sketches and trimming paper at her desk. When the door opened, the little bell above it chimed again just as it had the day before. This time, when Ella turned around, she saw Lila running toward her first. "Miss Ella," the little girl squealed, throwing her arms around her waist. "Daddy said we could visit." Ella bent down, surprised but smiling. "I missed you, sweetheart." James stood a few feet behind, his hands in his pockets, his expression warm but cautious. "I hope we are not interrupting." "Not at all," she said softly. "You are always welcome." Lila's eyes sparkled. "I brought your drawing back. I kept it safe for you." From her small backpack, she pulled out the folded crayon picture, the same one Ella had given James the day before. "See? It is still perfect." Ella smiled and knelt beside her. "It is even better now that you brought it." While Lila wandered around the studio, looking at art supplies and stacks of colorful paper, James stepped closer to Ella. His voice was low. "She has not stopped talking about you." Ella looked down, brushing her hands over the table. "I think I missed her more than I expected." James hesitated before speaking again. "You could come back, you know. For her. For both of us." She looked up at him, unsure. "Come back to what, James? The mansion? The contract? The chaos?" He shook his head. "No. Come back to a home that does not need papers to define it. The board knows the truth now. They have no hold over us anymore." Ella studied him carefully. The man standing before her looked different, not the distant CEO she had first met, but someone who had learned humility the hard way. "You say that like you mean it," she said softly. "I do," he answered. "I was wrong about what mattered. I kept trying to control everything so nothing could fall apart. But life is not meant to be controlled, Ella. It is meant to be lived." She smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who finally exhaled." Maybe I did," he said, a hint of warmth returning to his tone. "And maybe it is because of you." Before she could reply, Lila ran back over, waving a small sketch she had made on Ella's work table. "Look, Daddy. It is our family again, but this time I drew everyone inside the same house." Ella's heart caught at the sight. Lila had drawn herself, her father, and Ella under one roof, surrounded by hearts and flowers. It was childish and innocent, but somehow it felt like the truest picture of all. James knelt beside his daughter, resting a hand on her shoulder. "That is beautiful, Lila. Can Miss Ella come home now?" the child asked eagerly. "Please?" Ella met James's eyes. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then, gently, Ella said, "Maybe we can visit for dinner first. What do you think?" Lila clapped her hands. "Yes, a dinner. I will tell the cook to make pasta. Miss Ella loves pasta." "Oh," James smiled, relief and gratitude softening his expression. "Dinner it is." That evening, as twilight painted the sky, the mansion came alive again with the sounds of clinking dishes and quiet laughter. The dining room, once cold and formal, now felt alive. Lila told stories from school while Ella helped her twirl spaghetti onto her fork. James sat across from them, watching, his heart quietly full. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt like a museum of memories. It felt like a place where new ones were being made. After dinner, Lila went upstairs to prepare for bed, still talking about her drawing. When the child's footsteps faded, Ella and James found themselves alone in the living room. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light across the room. "I did not think I would ever be back here," Ella said quietly. "Neither did I," James admitted. "But I am glad you are." "Oh?" She glanced at the framed photograph of his late wife on the mantel. "Do you think she would approve?" He followed her gaze, his voice low. "I think she would thank you for helping me remember how to live and for being kind to our daughter when I could not." Ella nodded slowly, emotion tightening her throat. "She was lucky to have you." James looked at her, eyes steady. "No, I am the lucky one now." "I?" The room fell silent again, but it was not the heavy silence of grief. It was peaceful, like the calm after a storm. Outside, the last of the daylight faded, leaving only the gentle glow of the fire and the sound of the wind moving softly through the trees. Lila's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. Ella smiled. "I guess this place really is home for her." James took a slow breath. "It could be home for you too, if you let it." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, finally, she whispered, "Maybe it already is." The firelight flickered between them. And though neither spoke another word, both knew something unspoken had changed. What began as an act had become something real, something that could no longer be undone, nor would either of them want it to be. Morning sunlight drifted through the open curtains of the Hartley mansion, warm and golden. It was the first truly peaceful morning in months. The storm of rumors had faded, the tension in the house had lifted, and for the first time, laughter felt natural again. Downstairs, the smell of pancakes filled the air. Lila sat at the counter, kicking her feet as she helped stir the batter. "Miss Ella, I think you put too much sugar," she said seriously. Ella smiled as she mixed. "Then these will be extra sweet, just like you." James entered the kitchen, freshly dressed for work but moving slower than usual, his tie still hanging loose. "I was wondering what smelled so good," he said, leaning against the counter. "Breakfast," Ella replied. "Made by the world's best assistant chef." Lila giggled. "That is me." James looked at them both for a moment before saying, "You know, I could get used to mornings like this." Ella's heart fluttered at the quiet sincerity in his tone, but she smiled playfully instead. "Careful, Mr. Hartley. That sounds dangerously close to happiness." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I will take my chances." They ate together, something simple yet perfect. For the first time, the house no longer felt divided by status or unspoken tension. There was only warmth, the kind that made a home feel alive again. After breakfast, James prepared to leave for the office. Lila ran to give him a hug, nearly knocking the papers out of his hand. "Do not forget to smile today," she said. "I will try," he promised, hugging her back. "You take care of Miss Ella while I am gone." "Oh, I always do," Lila replied proudly. When he left, the house grew quieter but not empty. Ella and Lila spent the late morning painting in the garden. The sky was bright blue, the roses in bloom again after the rain. Ella dipped her brush into yellow paint, tracing sunlight across her canvas. "Miss Ella, why do you paint the light?" Lila asked, tilting her head. "Because light reminds me that even shadows have purpose," Ella said softly. "Without them, you would not know where the light begins." Lila blinked, thinking hard. "That sounds like something Daddy would say." Ella smiled faintly. "Maybe your father and I think more alike than he realizes." They painted until the afternoon breeze cooled the air. When it was time for Lila's nap, Ella carried the sleepy child upstairs and tucked her in. As she leaned down, Lila murmured drowsily, "Miss Ella, promise you will not leave again." Ella hesitated. "I promise I will stay as long as I can." "Good," Lila whispered, already half asleep. "Because home is not the same without you." When Ella stepped out of the room, her chest ached with quiet emotion. She walked down the hallway, pausing by the family photographs. Most were of James and Lila, but near the end of the hall was an empty frame, one that had never been filled. She wondered who it had been meant for. That evening, as twilight settled, James returned home earlier than expected. He found Ella in the living room, sorting through art supplies while music played softly in the background. "You are home early," she said. "I finished what I needed to," he replied, "and I realized I would rather be here." Ella smiled but kept her eyes on the brushes. "That sounds like a dangerous habit." "I could live with it," he said lightly. Then after a pause, he added, "I have been thinking about something." She looked up. "That sounds serious." "It is," he said. "I was offered a major partnership deal today. It would mean expanding overseas. But it also means more press, more attention, and less time here." "Will you take it?" she asked. "I have not decided," he admitted. The old me would have said yes without hesitation. But now I keep thinking about what matters more, another contract, or keeping this life we have found. Ella set down the brush, her voice soft. James, I cannot tell you what to do, but I think you already know the answer. Oak. He studied her face, the calm honesty in her eyes. You make it sound simple. It is not simple, she said, but it is clear. Some things are not meant to be bought, signed, or negotiated. He smiled faintly. You mean like happiness? She nodded. Like peace. He took a slow breath, then said, You have a way of reminding me who I want to be. Her heart tightened at the quiet confession. And you remind me that kindness still exists in the places people least expect it. Oh. The moment lingered between them, gentle, fragile, honest. Just then, Lila appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes. Daddy, Miss Ella, are you talking about boring adult things again? James laughed softly. We were just deciding who gets to tell you a bedtime story tonight. Lila grinned. Both of you. Later, the three of them sat on Lila's bed, the soft lamplight turning everything golden. Ella read from a picture book while Lila leaned against her father, listening with wide eyes. Halfway through, Lila's breathing slowed, her small hand resting over Ella's. When the child finally drifted to sleep, James whispered, You have a gift with her. Ella smiled gently. She makes it easy. They stood quietly, looking at Lila sleeping peacefully between them. The sight was simple, but it felt sacred. As they left the room, James turned off the light. In the hallway, he said softly, You asked me once if I thought my wife would approve. I think she would. She always believed that love shows up in unexpected ways. Ella looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe it does. The house settled into silence again, but it was a silence filled with life, warm, hopeful, and whole. For the first time since the story began, neither of them were pretending anymore. What started as an arrangement had quietly turned into something real, a rhythm of care, trust, and unspoken love that no contract could define. And in that quiet, both understood something simple and true. Sometimes the most genuine commitments are the ones never written down, only lived. The next morning brought a golden calm that wrapped around the Hartley mansion like a promise. The sky was clear, the garden still glistening from the dew. Inside, the air carried a quiet peace that Ella Martin had not felt in a long time. She had begun to belong here not because of the contract that once defined her presence, but because kindness and honesty had taken its place. In the kitchen, the morning light poured across the counter as she brewed coffee. Lila's laughter echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. The little girl ran in holding a drawing. Miss Ella, look, it is us again. No. Ella smiled and knelt down to see it. You have gotten even better at drawing. Lila nodded proudly. Daddy says we are going to the lake this weekend. Will you come? Ella hesitated for a moment, touched by the child's excitement. If your father still wants me there. I would love to. James entered just then, his tie undone, holding his phone in one hand. Of course she is coming, he said. I promised Lila we would make it a family trip. Lila cheered, running out of the room again. Ella stood, meeting his gaze. You did not have to include me. He smiled faintly. I wanted to. There was a pause, the kind of quiet filled with unspoken emotion. Then Ella turned back to the counter. Your coffee is ready. Thank you, he said softly, taking the cup from her. And for what it is worth, you have made this house feel alive again. Later that day, James left for work while Ella spent the afternoon sorting through art supplies with Lila. They painted, baked cookies that were slightly overdone, and laughed when flour spilled everywhere. It was the kind of messy happiness Ella had never realized she missed. By the time James returned that evening, the smell of burnt sugar hung in the air, and both Ella and Lila were giggling on the kitchen floor, surrounded by half-decorated cookies. He paused in the doorway, smiling at the scene. I see my kitchen survived another creative disaster, he said. Ella laughed. Barely, but we made progress. Lila held up a cookie shaped like a star. This one is for you, Daddy. He took it carefully. It looks perfect. It tastes like smoke, Lila said honestly, then burst out laughing. That night, after Lila went to bed, the house fell quiet again. Ella was cleaning up the last of the flour when James stepped into the kitchen. You do not have to do that, he said. I do not mind, she replied. "It feels nice to end the day doing something ordinary." He leaned against the counter, watching her for a moment. "I have a confession," he said finally. "I almost turned down the lake trip." She looked up, surprised. "Why?" "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that spending too much time together outside this house would make everything too real." She set down the dish towel, her voice gentle. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I think real is exactly what I need." Ella's chest tightened. "James, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I do not want this to be temporary anymore," he said. "Not for Lila, and not for me." The silence stretched between them, filled with warmth and uncertainty. "James," she said quietly, "what we have built here, this peace, it is precious, but it only works because it is honest. I need to know you are ready for that kind of honesty too." He nodded. "Then let us start with the truth." She waited, her heart steady but trembling slightly. "The truth is," he said softly, "you have changed the way I see everything. You brought back laughter into my home, trust into my life, and hope into my heart. I never thought I would feel any of that again." Her eyes shimmered, though she tried to stay composed. "James, you do not need to say things you cannot take back." "I mean every word," he said firmly. "No contracts, no pretending, no headlines, just truth." Ella took a slow breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then maybe it is time we write a new story." Before either could say more, the sound of small footsteps interrupted them. Lila appeared in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bunny. "Daddy, Miss Ella, why are you whispering?" James smiled gently. "We were just talking about our trip." "Can I sleep in Miss Ella's room tonight?" Lila asked. Ella laughed softly. "Only if your father says yes." James nodded. "Just this once." The little girl cheered, running to Ella's side. "Yay!" "Oh." A few minutes later, Ella tucked Lila into her bed. The child yawned, her small hand gripping Ella's. "Miss Ella," she said sleepily, "when we go to the lake, can we all build a sandcastle together?" Ella smiled. "Of course we can. Even Daddy?" "Especially Daddy." Lila giggled softly, her eyelids fluttering closed. "Good. Then it will not fall down." Ella sat there for a while, listening to the child's steady breathing. Her words stayed in Ella's mind, long after she had fallen asleep. "Then it will not fall down." When she stepped into the hallway, James was standing there quietly. "She has a way of saying things that mean more than she knows," Ella said softly. "She gets that from her mother," he replied, "but she learns it from you." Ella looked at him, her voice gentle. "James, are you sure about all this?" "I do not want to be another decision made out of guilt or loneliness." He shook his head. "This is not about loneliness. It is about finally choosing what feels right." They stood there in the soft glow of the hallway light, the air between them, full of quiet truth. "I do not know what tomorrow will bring," she said. "Neither do I," he replied. "But whatever it is, I would rather face it with you." Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. Inside, two people who had once signed a contract to pretend had found something far more binding, a quiet, unspoken commitment, written not on paper, but in the way they chose to stay. The weekend arrived with soft sunshine and the sound of wind through the trees. The Hartley family car rolled down a quiet country road, carrying laughter and light conversation. For the first time in years, James Hartley had taken an entire weekend off. There were no meetings, no calls, no distractions, only the promise of a peaceful trip to the lake. In the back seat, Lila pressed her hands against the window. "Look, Miss Ella, you can see the water." Ella smiled, her hair brushing lightly in the breeze from the open window. "It is beautiful." James glanced in the rearview mirror, watching the two of them. "It has been years since I came here," he said softly. "My wife and I used to bring Lila here when she was little." Ella nodded. "It feels like the kind of place where memories wait for you." When they arrived, the lake shimmered under the morning light. The cabin James had rented stood among tall pine trees, overlooking calm silver-blue water. Lila ran ahead, arms spread wide. "It is perfect." Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and old wood. It was simple but warm. Ella set their bags down while Lila explored every corner, laughing. James opened the windows, letting the sunlight pour in. After lunch, they went down to the water's edge. Lila built sand castles, while James and Ella watched from nearby chairs. The breeze carried the faint scent of pine and the soft sound of rippling waves. "Do you ever think about starting over?" James asked quietly. Ella looked out at the water. "Every day. But I think starting over is less about running away and more about choosing what to carry with you." He smiled faintly. "You always know how to say things that make sense." I think you just needed someone to remind you," she said. Lila ran over, her face bright. "Miss Ella, Daddy, come help. The castle needs towers." They joined her in the sand, laughing as they built crooked towers and carved tiny windows with sticks. Lila pressed a small, heart-shaped rock into the top of the tallest tower. "Now it will not fall down," she said proudly. As the sun lowered, they sat together watching the sky turn shades of gold and rose. Lila leaned against Ella's arm, her eyes growing heavy. "Can we stay here forever?" Ella brushed a strand of hair from her face. "We cannot stay forever, sweetheart, but we can make moments that feel like forever." Lila smiled sleepily. "Then this one counts." James carried her back to the cabin as she dozed off. Ella followed quietly behind, her heart full. Later, when the fire crackled in the stone fireplace, James handed Ella a mug of tea. "You know," he said softly, "if someone had told me a few months ago that I would be here sitting by a fire, feeling at peace, I would not have believed them." "Sometimes peace comes when you stop fighting what is meant to find you," she replied. He looked at her across the flickering light. "I think I stopped fighting the day you walked into that wedding." Ella smiled, a little shy but sincere. "That day feels like a lifetime ago." "It was the beginning," he said, "even if we did not know it." They sat in silence after that, watching the flames dance. The sound of Lila's soft breathing drifted from the next room. Outside, the moonlight shimmered across the lake, calm and steady. In that quiet, something unspoken settled between them, a sense of belonging, of home, of love, that no contract could define. Ella glanced toward the sleeping child and whispered, "I think she was right." James tilted his head. "About what?" "If we build it together," she said, "it will not fall down." He smiled, reaching gently for her hand. "Then let us make sure it never does." The fire burned low, the night wrapped them in its stillness, and for the first time in both their lives, the future no longer felt uncertain, it felt earned. The next morning at the lake began with golden light spilling through the cabin windows. The air smelled of pine and fresh water. Birds called softly from the trees as gentle waves lapped against the dock. Ella Martin woke first. She stood by the window for a moment, watching sunlight shimmer across the surface of the lake. It felt like a new beginning, quiet, steady, and real. Behind her, Lila stirred on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. "Miss Ella, is it morning already?" she asked sleepily. "It is," Ella said softly. "Would you like to see the sunrise with me?" Lila nodded, her small hand slipping into Ella's. Together, they stepped outside onto the wooden deck. The cool breeze brushed against their faces as the horizon turned gold and rose. A few minutes later, James joined them, still in his sweater, holding 3 mugs of hot cocoa. "I thought you might be cold," he said. Lila grinned. "Daddy, it looks like the sky is waking up." James smiled and wrapped his arm gently around his daughter. "It does, sweetheart. It looks like the world is starting over." Unquote. They stood there in silence, the 3 of them watching the day break. No words were needed. The peace between them said everything. After breakfast, Lila ran down to the water with her bucket and shovel, humming softly as she played. James and Ella stayed behind on the porch, sipping coffee. "She is happy," Ella said. "It has been a long time since I have seen her this free." "She is happy because of you," James replied. "Because you showed her that love does not have to disappear after loss." Ella looked at him, her voice gentle. "You gave her the courage to laugh again. That is something only a father can do." He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that went beyond gratitude. "Maybe we did it together." For a while, they said nothing. The sound of Lila's laughter carried across the lake like a melody, soft and pure. Ella glanced toward the child and whispered, "Do you think peace like this can last?" James looked at her and said, "If we keep choosing it every day, I believe it can." The sunlight shimmered brighter on the water, and in that golden stillness, they all understood this was no longer a moment borrowed from chance. It was the beginning of something lasting. That afternoon, The sunlight danced gently on the lake's surface. The air was warm, the kind of stillness that made time slow down. James Hartley sat on the porch, watching as Ella and Lila built another sandcastle by the water's edge. Their laughter carried across the breeze, light and full of life. He had spent years surrounded by numbers, meetings, and deadlines. But here, in this quiet corner of the world, he realized that all those things had never truly filled the silence inside him. What did was standing right there, his daughter and the woman who had unknowingly changed everything. Lila waved from the shore. "Daddy, come help! The tower keeps falling!" James smiled, setting down his coffee. "I am coming, my little architect." When he reached them, Ella laughed as she tried to press wet sand into shape. "We are losing the battle," she said. He knelt beside her, his hands brushing against hers as they both steadied the base. "Not if we rebuild together," he replied. Lila clapped her hands. "See? It works better when we all do it." Oh. They worked in silence for a while, shaping towers and walls, decorating them with shells and smooth stones. When the castle finally stood tall and steady, Lila planted a small feather on top. "That is our flag," she said proudly. "Now no wind can knock it down." Ella smiled at her, then at James. "She really believes that," she whispered. "She is right," he said quietly. "It will not fall as long as we keep it standing." Later, as the sun began to lower, they sat together on a wooden bench overlooking the lake. Lila had fallen asleep against James's shoulder, her small hand resting in Ella's. The orange glow of sunset wrapped around them like warmth made visible. "I used to think I understood what strength meant," James said softly. "But it was just control, not courage. Real strength looks like this." Ella tilted her head. "Like what?" He smiled faintly. "Like peace that you build with people who stay." "Ugh." Her eyes softened. "Then I guess we are both learning the same lesson." He looked at her for a long moment, the light of the sunset catching in his eyes. "Ella, when all this began, I thought you were a temporary part of our story. But somewhere along the way, you became the story." She hesitated, her heart tightening. "James, what happens when we leave this place?" He reached for her hand, steady and sure. "Then we keep what matters most. The laughter, the calm, the truth. We take it home with us." Ella nodded slowly. "Then let us promise one thing." "What is that?" he asked. "That we never let fear decide for us again." He smiled, his thumb brushing lightly against her hand. "I promise." As the last light faded and the first stars appeared, the lake reflected their quiet promise, steady, shining, and real. The world around them was changing, but for that one moment, everything they had built together stood unshaken. The next morning at the lake began with the sound of soft rain tapping against the cabin roof. The world outside was misty and calm, the kind of quiet that made everything feel suspended in time. Inside, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the gentle crackle of the fireplace. Ella Martin stood by the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. The lake shimmered under a veil of gray, and the pine trees swayed gently. Behind her, James Hartley was preparing breakfast while Lila arranged her toys on the floor. "Miss Ella, can we still go outside even if it rains?" Lila asked, tilting her head. "Maybe later when it stops," Ella replied. "The rain is giving the earth a little rest," Lila smiled. "Then I guess we can rest too." James set down a plate of pancakes and looked at Ella. "You know, she listens to you more than she listens to me." Ella laughed softly. "That is because she thinks I make better pancakes." He raised an eyebrow, pretending to be offended. "Is that so?" Lila giggled. "Miss Ella wins. Daddy always burns the edges." They all laughed, and for a moment the sound filled the cabin with a warmth that no fire could match. It was the kind of laughter that belonged to people who had found their way through chaos and finally reached calm. After breakfast, they gathered by the fireplace. Lila drew pictures on scraps of paper while Ella and James sat nearby, watching the flames flicker. The rain outside had softened to a drizzle. "You look peaceful," James said quietly. Ella smiled. "I feel peaceful. I had forgotten what that feels like." He nodded slowly. "It has been a long time since I felt it too. But I think this," he gestured around the room, "is what home is supposed to be." She looked at him, her voice gentle. "Home is not a place, James. It is the people you choose to keep." He studied her face, seeing the truth of it reflected in her calm. "Then, I think I finally know who that is." Ella's heart tightened. She wanted to speak, but words felt too fragile. Before she could respond, Lila crawled into her lap, holding up her drawing. "Look," the child said proudly. "It is us at the lake. You, me, and Daddy. I drew the rain too, because even when it rains, we are still happy." Ella's eyes softened as she looked at the picture. "It is beautiful, sweetheart." James smiled at his daughter. "You are quite the artist." Lila leaned against Ella's shoulder. "Can we make another promise?" Ella looked down at her. "What kind of promise?" "That we will always laugh, even when it rains," Lila said simply. Ella and James exchanged a glance, both smiling. "We promise," they said together. The rain eased, and the clouds began to break, revealing streaks of pale sunlight. They stepped outside a little later, the ground damp beneath their feet. The lake glimmered under the clearing sky, its surface smooth and silver. James stood beside Ella, hands in his pockets. "You know, I used to think storms were something to avoid," he said quietly. "Now I realize sometimes they are what make the air feel clean again." Ella turned to him, her voice warm. "Maybe peace is not about avoiding storms. Maybe it is about learning to stand through them." Oh, quote. He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "With you, I think I finally can." As the sun broke through the clouds, the light fell across the water, painting everything gold. Lila ran ahead, her laughter echoing over the lake. Ella and James followed slowly, walking side by side. No contracts, no pretending. Just truth, love, and the steady promise of something that had survived both storms and silence and was now, finally, real. The drive back from the lake took place under a clear blue sky. The air was cool, crisp, and full of quiet promise. As the car moved down the long stretch of road toward the city, Lila hummed softly in the back seat, tracing hearts on the fogged window with her finger. James Hartley drove with one hand on the steering wheel, and the other resting loosely beside him. Ella Martin sat in the passenger seat, gazing out at the endless horizon. Neither spoke for a while. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that did not need to be filled. Every so often, James glanced her way, his expression thoughtful. "You are quiet," he said finally. Ella smiled faintly. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About how strange it feels to leave a place that started to feel like home," she said softly. "The lake felt like a pause in time, like the world stopped chasing us for a moment." James nodded. "Maybe home is not about where you are, but who you are with." She looked at him, her eyes warm. "You sound like someone who has been reading my mind." He chuckled. "Maybe I am just finally listening." When they reached the mansion, the afternoon sun had begun to lower. The staff greeted them warmly, surprised by the ease and laughter that now filled the air. The house, once a cold monument of silence, felt alive again. That evening, while James handled a few work calls, Ella took Lila to the garden. The flowers were blooming in soft shades of white and gold. Lila picked a small daisy and tucked it behind Ella's ear. "Now you look like sunshine," she said proudly. Ella laughed softly. "Then you must be my little light." Lila nodded seriously. "Daddy says light always finds its way home. I think that means you." Before Ella could respond, James appeared at the doorway, smiling at the sight. "I see you two are conspiring without me." "We were talking about light," Lila said, "and Miss Ella being sunshine." "Then I guess we should all stay close," James said, "because every home needs its light." As night settled, they had dinner together. The meal was simple: roasted vegetables, pasta, and laughter between bites. It was the kind of evening that did not need celebration to feel meaningful. After dinner, Lila went upstairs to prepare for bed. James and Ella lingered in the quiet of the dining room, the faint glow of the chandelier reflecting in their eyes. "She is sleeping better now," James said quietly. "No more nightmares." "She feels safe," Ella replied. "That is because of you." He looked at her with a mix of gratitude and something deeper. "No, it is because of us." There was a pause, and then he said softly, "Ella, do you ever think about what comes next?" She folded her hands in her lap. "Every day, but for once, I am not afraid of it." He leaned slightly forward. "And what if I told you that I do not want you to think about leaving? That I want you here not because of convenience, not because of obligation, but because I want this to be your home too." Ella's breath caught. "James, "I am not asking for an answer tonight," he said. "I just needed to say it out loud. For too long, I let fear dictate my choices. I do not want to live that way anymore." She met his gaze, her voice steady, but tender. "You have already changed, James. The man who once hid behind contracts is now speaking from his heart." He smiled faintly. "You taught me that." The house grew quiet again. Somewhere in the distance, the grandfather clock chimed softly, marking another hour of a day that already felt timeless. Later that night, Ella checked on Lila. The little girl was fast asleep, clutching her stuffed bunny and smiling even in her dreams. Ella brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, whispering, "Sweet dreams, my little light." As she turned to leave, she saw James standing in the doorway. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "She adores you." Ella smiled. "She makes it easy." They walked down the hall together. When they reached the staircase, he stopped and said quietly, "Ella, I meant what I said earlier. You have given us back more than peace. You have given us hope." She looked at him, emotion flickering in her eyes. "And you gave me something I did not think I would find again." "What is that?" he asked. "Belonging," she said simply. They stood there for a moment, in the soft golden light, neither needing to say more. Down the hall, Lila murmured in her sleep, her small voice drifting through the stillness. "Do not let it fall down." Ella and James both smiled, their eyes meeting. "We will not," he said quietly. And as the night settled fully around them, they both knew the truth. What had begun as an act of pretense had become the foundation of something real, something steady, something that would not fall. Morning came quietly to the Hartley mansion. Soft light spread across the hallways, touching every corner that had once felt empty. The house was no longer the cold, polished place it used to be. It had warmth now. Laughter had begun to live in its walls again. Ella Martin woke early. She made her way to the kitchen, barefoot, the marble floor cool beneath her feet. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. It had become a habit, one she secretly enjoyed the peace of dawn before the world began moving. As she poured a cup, she noticed a small note on the counter. The handwriting was careful, familiar. "Gone to the office early. Big meeting today. Save a smile for when I get back. James." She smiled, tucking the note into her apron pocket. Outside, the sun was already beginning to rise. In the garden, Lila's voice drifted through the open window. "Miss Ella, come see. There are butterflies." Ella walked out to the garden, where the little girl knelt by the flowers, eyes wide with wonder. Dozens of small white butterflies fluttered above the lavender. "They are beautiful," Ella said softly, kneeling beside her. Lila nodded seriously. "Daddy says they mean good luck. I think it means something nice is coming." Ella smiled. "I think you might be right." The morning passed gently. They painted together in the garden, their laughter carrying into the house. It felt like a perfect day, simple, full of small joys. But deep inside, Ella knew peace had a fragile way of being tested. By afternoon, the weather began to change. Clouds gathered over the city. The wind picked up. James had not yet returned from his meeting. Ella checked her phone several times, reminding herself not to worry. At last, she received a text. "Running late. Everything fine. See you soon." She exhaled in relief, slipping the phone into her pocket. Still, something in the pit of her stomach felt uneasy. That evening, as the rain began to fall, Ella prepared dinner. Lila sat at the table coloring, humming softly. "Daddy is late," she said. "He will be here soon," Ella assured her, stirring the pot on the stove. When the sound of tires finally crunched on the wet gravel outside, Lila ran to the door. "Daddy!" she shouted. James stepped inside, rain on his coat, his expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. "There is my girl," he said, lifting her up. "And there is dinner, which smells better than anything I have eaten all week." Ella turned from the stove, smiling. "You are just saying that because you missed a real meal." "Guilty," he admitted, setting Lila down. "But it is true." They ate together as the storm rumbled outside. Lila told stories between bites, and James listened with full attention, the way only a parent could. Ella watched them both, feeling something she had not dared to name contentment. When dinner was over, Lila yawned. "Miss Ella, can you tell me a bedtime story?" Ella smiled. "Of course." Upstairs, She tucked Lila in, the sound of rain pattering softly against the window. What kind of story tonight? Lila thought for a moment. One about love that does not break. Ella hesitated, then began softly. Once there was a man who lived in a tall house filled with quiet. He thought he was strong because he never asked for help. But deep down, he was lonely. Then one day, a woman came into his life, not to change it, but to remind him that love is not about power, it is about peace. Lila's eyelids grew heavy. Did the man love her? Ella smiled. He did. But more importantly, he learned to love himself again. Oh. The little girl drifted off to sleep, her small hand clutching Ella's fingers. When Ella stepped out into the hallway, James was standing there. That was quite the story, he said quietly. She smiled. You heard? I might have, he said, leaning against the doorframe. You have a gift for saying what people need to hear. Ella met his gaze. Do you believe in stories like that, James? I did not, he admitted. Not until now. They walked downstairs together. The storm had grown heavier, the rain falling in steady sheets against the windows. In the living room, the fire burned low, throwing golden light across the room. James poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to her. To new beginnings, he said. She raised her cup slightly. And to keeping promises. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that was full, not empty. The house creaked softly in the wind, the sound comforting rather than lonely. After a moment, James spoke again, his voice low. The meeting today was important. The board wants me to step into a new position, global expansion. It would mean traveling, being gone for months at a time. Ella's heart tightened. And what did you tell them? He looked at her, his expression steady. I told them no. She blinked. No? I am done chasing things that do not matter, he said. I built a company, but I almost forgot how to live. I do not want to lose us for more titles or distance. Ella's voice softened. You are choosing peace. He nodded. I am choosing home. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. Then you have already won. The firelight flickered, painting gold on their faces. For the first time in a long time, James looked completely at ease. Later that night, when the storm quieted, he walked Ella to the doorway of her room. Thank you, he said quietly. For staying. For everything. Oh. She shook her head gently. Thank you for letting me. He smiled, then turned to leave but paused. Ella, he said softly, you asked me once what real love looks like. I think it looks like this, standing beside someone even when the world outside is falling apart. Her breath caught, and before she could reply, he added, Good night. After he left, she stood in the quiet, the sound of the rain fading beyond the window. Her heart felt steady, grounded, alive. Down the hall, Lila murmured in her sleep again. Do not let it fall down, she whispered dreamily. Ella smiled through the dim light. We will not, she whispered back. Outside, the storm cleared, revealing a sky full of stars. Inside the mansion, warmth filled every corner. And though no one said it aloud, everyone knew the story that had started as a contract had become a life, a family, and a love strong enough to weather anything. The next few days passed in quiet rhythm. The Hartley mansion had settled into a peace that felt almost sacred. The tension that had once filled its walls was gone, replaced by the steady heartbeat of family small, simple moments that together felt like something lasting. Ella Martin spent her mornings in the garden, sketching as the sunlight moved across the flowers. Lila played nearby, her laughter floating like music through the open air. James Hartley often joined them when he could, his work now balanced between business and the life he was learning to protect. One afternoon, as Ella finished watering the roses, she noticed Lila sitting on the steps with her sketchbook open. What are you drawing today? Ella asked, walking closer. Lila grinned. It is a surprise. You cannot look until it is done. Ella smiled and sat beside her, pretending not to peek. All right. I will wait. When the little girl finally turned the page around, Ella's heart softened. The drawing showed 3 figures, Lila in the middle, holding hands with her father and Ella. Above them, the sky was full of tiny yellow stars. It is us, Lila said proudly. And I drew the stars because Daddy says stars mean promises that never fade. Ella blinked away the sudden warmth in her eyes. "It is beautiful, sweetheart." Just then, James stepped outside, rolling up his sleeves. "I see the artists are hard at work," he said. Lila ran to him, holding up her sketch. "Look, Daddy, we are stars now." James knelt down, smiling. "That is exactly what you are, my little light." He looked at Ella then, his eyes steady, full of quiet meaning. "Both of you." As evening came, they had dinner on the patio. The sky turned soft shades of orange and gold as the sun dipped behind the hills. Lila talked endlessly about school projects and weekend plans, her energy lighting up the space around them. When she finished eating, she rested her head on Ella's shoulder. "Miss Ella, when people love each other, they stay, right?" Ella brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Yes, sweetheart. When people truly love each other, they find reasons to stay." Lila smiled sleepily. "Then I think you are staying forever." Ella looked over at James, who had paused mid-sip of his coffee. Their eyes met, and in that glance, both understood they were no longer pretending. Later that night, after Lila went to bed, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic against the windows. James found Ella in the library, curled up on the couch with a book in her lap. The fire cast a gentle glow across her face. He stood by the doorway for a moment before saying, "You look peaceful." She glanced up, smiling. "I was just thinking how strange it feels to finally stop waiting for the other shoe to drop." He walked closer. "You mean to stop waiting for something to go wrong?" She nodded. "Yes. For a long time, I thought happiness was borrowed something that could be taken away. But maybe it is not borrowed at all. Maybe it is built." He sat beside her, his voice quiet. "Then we will keep building it." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of the rain and the faint ticking of the clock. Then he said softly, "Ella, I have something to ask you." She looked at him, curious. "What is it?" He took a slow breath. "I know this started with a contract, a lie we both agreed to tell. But every moment since then has been real to me. You and Lila are my truth now. So, I need to ask, not as a business arrangement, but as a man who finally understands what love means, will you stay? Not because you have to, but because you want to." Ella's heart tightened, her breath catching in her chest. For a moment, she could not speak. Then, softly, she said, "James, I do not think I could ever walk away now. You and Lila, this became the life I did not know I was looking for." He smiled, relief and emotion flickering in his eyes. "Then I guess we are both where we belong." She reached out, taking his hand. "I think we always were. We just needed to stop pretending long enough to see it." Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, but the storm never reached them. Inside, the fire burned low, warm and steady. As the night deepened, the two of them sat together in quiet understanding. Nothing grand or dramatic, just real. The kind of peace that comes when the heart finally knows it is safe. Upstairs, Lila murmured in her sleep again, her voice soft and content. "Do not let it fall down." Ella smiled, leaning her head against James's shoulder. "It will not," she whispered. He placed his hand gently over hers. "No, not this time." The rain outside slowed to a drizzle, and for the first time in a very long time, the house stood still, not in emptiness, but in wholeness. What had begun as an agreement had turned into something enduring. Love, after all, was not the grand gesture or the perfect plan. It was this: staying, showing up, and choosing each other again every single day. Morning light touched the Hartley mansion with a golden calm. The city outside was just waking, but inside the house, peace already lived and breathed. The long corridors that had once echoed with silence now carried the soft rhythm of voices, laughter, and footsteps. Ella Martin stood by the kitchen window, watching the sunlight spill across the garden. The roses were in full bloom, the white ones James Hartley had planted for his late wife, now standing side by side with the yellow ones Ella had added weeks ago. It was a quiet symbol, grief and renewal growing together, sharing the same soil. Behind her, the sound of hurried feet and soft giggles broke the stillness. Lila ran in, still wearing her pajamas, holding her sketchbook. Miss Ella! Miss Ella! I finished the new drawing." Ella smiled, setting down her coffee. "Let me see." The child flipped open the page. The picture showed a big house surrounded by flowers, 3 people standing in front of it: James, Lila, and Ella, each holding a small star in their hands. Above them, the words were written carefully in crayon. "Home is where love stays." Ella's chest warmed. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "And true." James entered just then, dressed for work but without the usual rush in his movements. "Let me guess," he said, smiling. "Another masterpiece?" Lila held up her drawing proudly. "It is us, and I wrote the words all by myself." He took the sketch gently, studying it. "It is perfect," he said. "You even got my bad hair right." Ella laughed softly. "She has your attention to detail." Lila grinned. "Miss Ella helped me with the words. She knows how to make them sound pretty." James looked at Ella, his eyes warm. "She always does." The moment lingered, simple, ordinary, but deep. It was the kind of morning that did not need grand declarations. It just was. After breakfast, James left for the office, kissing Lila's forehead and promising to be home for dinner. Ella watched him from the porch as the car disappeared down the driveway. A soft breeze stirred the trees, carrying the faint scent of roses. By noon, Ella was in her small art studio, working on a painting. It was a portrait of Lila sitting in the garden, surrounded by flowers and sunlight. As her brush moved, she realized the strokes felt different now, not like escape, but like belonging. She was no longer painting from longing. She was painting from peace. That afternoon, the mansion was quiet again. Lila was napping, the housekeeper moving softly through the halls. Ella sat by the window with her sketchbook open, lost in thought. When the sound of a car door closing reached her ears, she looked up. James had returned early. He walked toward her with something small in his hand, a white envelope. "What is that?" she asked curiously. He smiled, a little hesitant. "It is something I should have done a long time ago." She waited as he handed it to her. Inside was a folded document, one she recognized immediately. The original contract. The one that had started everything. "I kept it all this time," James said quietly. "But it does not belong in a drawer anymore." "Oh, Ken." He took the paper back, tore it neatly in half, then in half again. The sound was small but powerful. "We do not need this anymore," he said. "We never did." Ella looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "You are sure?" He nodded. "Completely. What we have now is not a promise written on paper. It is something real, something we live every day." Her eyes shimmered. "Then I guess this is the true beginning." James smiled faintly. "No. This is the continuation. The beginning was the day you said yes to pretending, and ended up teaching me how to live honestly." They stood there for a long moment, the torn paper between them, the weight of the past finally gone. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the three of them had dinner together on the patio. The sky turned amber and pink, the air soft and full of the smell of blooming flowers. Lila talked about her school art fair, waving her hands excitedly as she described what she wanted to make. "Daddy, can Miss Ella help me with my project?" she asked eagerly. James smiled. "I think she would love to." Ella nodded. "What are we making?" Lila thought for a moment. "A model of our home, with lights that never go out." Ella's heart melted. "Then we will make it together." As twilight deepened, Lila's energy finally began to fade. She rested her head against her father's shoulder. "Can we always stay like this?" she murmured sleepily. James kissed her hair. "Yes, sweetheart, always." After she went to bed, the night grew quiet again. The stars shimmered faintly above the garden. Ella and James stayed outside, the air between them comfortable and full of meaning. "You know," James said softly, "for the first time in years, I do not feel like I am waiting for something to go wrong." Ella looked at him, smiling. "Maybe that is what peace really is, when you finally stop waiting for happiness to break." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "Do you ever think about how strange it is that everything began with a lie?" She nodded. "It is funny. We built a fake story to protect ourselves, and somehow the truth found its way through anyway." James chuckled quietly. "It did. Maybe that is what love does. It shows up where it is least expected, and stays even after the masks fall away." The silence that followed was soft, wrapped in the hum of crickets and the distant sound of the city. Ella looked up at the stars, her voice barely above a whisper. Lila said stars mean promises that never fade. James followed her gaze. "Then let us make one more promise," he said. She turned to him. "What kind?" "That we keep choosing this," he said. "Not because it is perfect, but because it is real." Ella nodded, her smile small but full of emotion. "Then I promise." Ah. The night air carried the faint scent of rain, but no storm came. The sky stayed clear, endless, and full of stars. Inside, the mansion was still the fire low, the halls peaceful. Upstairs, Lila slept soundly, her small hands clutching her stuffed bunny. On her nightstand sat the newest drawing, a home surrounded by stars. Downstairs, James and Ella sat side by side beneath the quiet sky. No contracts, no pretending, only truth. And in that stillness, what had once begun as an act of convenience had turned into something stronger than either of them had dared to hope for. Not a story about wealth or power, but about kindness, integrity, and the courage to start again. Love had not arrived in grand gestures. It had arrived in small, steady choices: morning coffee, bedtime stories, shared laughter, and promises whispered beneath starlight. It had arrived, stayed, and finally become home.